The most heartbreaking sight at the Family Feud studio that Tuesday afternoon wasn't something anyone could see at first glance. It was the small notebook that 72-year-old Margaret O'Brien clutched in her hands, filled with Christmas gift ideas for grandchildren she might not see grow up. Her handwriting, once elegant and flowing, now showed the careful precision of someone who understood that every word she wrote might become a treasured memory for the people she loved most. Margaret walked slowly through the bright Family Feud corridors beside her daughter Patricia, her steps measured not by age alone, but by the careful conservation of energy that comes with fighting a battle you're destined to lose. Margaret O'Brien had received her pancreatic cancer diagnosis 4 months earlier, on what should have been an ordinary Thursday morning in August. The oncologist had delivered the news with practiced compassion. Stage 4 inoperable, 6 to 12 months, if she was fortunate. But it was the conversation 3 weeks ago that had changed everything. When Dr. Martinez had sat across from Margaret in his sterile office and said the words that had been haunting her ever since. "Mrs. O'Brien, I want you to understand that this will likely be your last Christmas. You should plan accordingly." Planning accordingly. The phrase had echoed in Margaret's mind for days afterward. How does someone plan for a last Christmas? How do you create memories that will have to sustain your loved ones for all the Christmases to come? Margaret had spent 45 years as an elementary school teacher, 48 years as a devoted wife until her husband Thomas had passed 3 years prior, and 22 years as a grandmother to 4 precious grandchildren. Christmas had always been her masterpiece, the holiday she orchestrated with the dedication of a symphony conductor and the love of someone who understood that traditions create the scaffolding of family memory. The Family Feud application had been submitted back in June, during what Margaret now recognized as the brief period between her initial diagnosis and the full understanding of what that diagnosis meant. Her daughter, Patricia, had convinced her to apply, arguing that appearing on their favorite game show would be a wonderful family adventure. When the acceptance call came 2 weeks after the devastating conversation with Dr. Martinez, Margaret's first instinct had been to decline. How could she perform for television cameras when she was carrying the weight of last times and final goodbyes? But then she had thought about her grandchildren. 8-year-old Emma, 10-year-old Michael, 6-year-old Sophie, and 4-year-old Jack. They didn't know about the diagnosis yet. Patricia and her siblings had decided to wait until after the holidays, wanting to preserve this last innocent Christmas for the children. Margaret realized that this television appearance might be one of the few opportunities she had left to create a joyful memory that her family could treasure, something bright and celebratory that would exist alongside the difficult memories to come. Margaret's notebook contained more than Christmas gift ideas. It held carefully written letters to each grandchild for future birthdays, graduations, weddings, all the milestones she wouldn't be there to witness. She'd been working on it methodically, 1 page at a time. Whenever her energy allowed, the notebook represented her desperate attempts to stretch her presence across years she wouldn't live to see, to remain a grandmother even after grandmothering became impossible. Steve Harvey approached the O'Brien family during the pre-show introductions with his characteristic warmth, but something about Margaret's serene composure and the way her family gathered protectively around her immediately caught his attention. In decades of hosting, Steve had developed an instinct for reading people who were carrying significant life challenges. And there was something about this 72-year-old woman's gentle dignity that suggested someone facing profound loss with remarkable grace. "Well, hello there, beautiful lady," Steve said, approaching Margaret with the respectful warmth he reserved for elders who clearly commanded family devotion. "What's your name? And tell me about this wonderful family of yours." "Margaret O'Brien," she replied, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades managing classrooms full of children. "This is my daughter Patricia, my son-in-law Robert, and my daughter Michelle. We're here from Boston, and this gentleman here," she gestured toward Robert, with obvious affection, "has been taking care of all of us since my husband passed." Steve's trained eye caught details that spoke to Margaret's condition. The way she gripped the podium for subtle support, the carefully applied makeup that couldn't quite disguise her pallor, the protective positioning of her family members. But more than the signs of illness, Steve noticed something remarkable about Margaret's presence. A kind of peaceful determination that suggested someone who had made peace with difficult circumstances. "And what did you do for work, Margaret?" Steve asked, sensing that this woman had stories worth hearing. I taught third grade for 45 years, Margaret said with pride that momentarily transformed her tired features. Best job in the world. You get to watch children discover that they're capable of magic every single day. Steve smiled, recognizing the particular warmth that lifelong educators carry. 45 years with third graders. That's a special kind of patience and love. What keeps bringing you back to that classroom every year? Margaret's response revealed something fundamental about her character. Every September, you get 30 new chances to change a life. Every June, you send 30 more confident children into the world. If you're very fortunate, some of them remember you fondly when they're grown. The simple philosophy carried profound weight. Steve understood immediately that he was talking to someone who had built a life around nurturing others, who had found meaning in helping young people discover their potential. Looking at Margaret, Steve saw someone who approached even terminal illness with the same gentle wisdom she'd brought to decades of teaching. As the O'Brien family took their positions for the actual game, competing against the Williams family from Chicago, Steve found himself paying as much attention to Margaret's energy levels as to the flow of the game. She participated with enthusiasm when required, her answers thoughtful and often tinged with the humor that had served her well in classrooms full of 8-year-olds. During the first 2 rounds, Margaret surprised everyone with her quick wit despite her obvious fatigue. When Steve asked for things that make a house feel like home during the holidays, Margaret confidently answered, the smell of cookies baking, earning the #1 spot on the board, and revealing her deep understanding of what creates lasting family memories. But it was during a commercial break before the final round that Steve witnessed something that would change his entire understanding of courage. While the cameras were off and the crew was adjusting equipment, Steve noticed Margaret quietly writing in her notebook, her hand trembling slightly from medication side effects, her concentration absolute despite the chaos of television production around her. Patricia whispered something to her mother, and Steve saw Margaret nod, then carefully tear a page from the notebook and hand it to her daughter. The gesture was small but profound. A woman using the brief moments of a television taping to continue the work of creating memories for people she loved. Mrs. O'Brien, Steve said quietly, approaching the family podium, That's a pretty important notebook you've got there. Margaret looked up, meeting Steve's eyes with the direct gaze of someone who had moved beyond the need for pretense. Christmas lists, she said simply. For my grandchildren. I want to make sure this Christmas, she paused, searching for words that could encompass everything she couldn't say directly. Extra special. The simple explanation carried volumes of meaning. Steve understood immediately that this wasn't just about Christmas shopping, but about a grandmother trying to stretch her love across years she wouldn't live to see, trying to ensure that the holiday magic would continue even after she was gone. The final round arrived with the O'Brien family holding a comfortable lead, but Steve's focus had shifted entirely from the game to the woman standing at the podium who was clearly using precious time and limited energy to create something beautiful for her family. We asked 100 people, Steve announced. What's your family's favorite holiday tradition? It was Margaret's turn at the podium. She stepped forward slowly, her notebook tucked securely under one arm, her free hand gripping the podium for support. Her eyes met Steve's with an intensity that suggested this question had touched something deeply personal and urgent. Steve repeated the question, his voice unconsciously gentling as he sensed this topic carried enormous weight for Margaret. What's your family's favorite holiday tradition? For a moment, Margaret was silent, and Steve could see her wrestling with something larger than a game show answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear despite its softness, carrying a wisdom that seemed to reach every person in the studio. Making Christmas magical for the children, Margaret said, her words carefully chosen and heavy with meaning. Every year, I plan every detail, every surprise, every tradition. Because childhood Christmas memories are the foundation of family joy. But this year, her voice began to break. This year will be my last Christmas with them, and I don't know how to make it special enough to last them a lifetime. The studio fell completely silent, not the expectant quiet of an audience waiting for the next laugh, but the profound silence of hundreds of people collectively confronting the reality of final holidays, of love that transcends mortality, of the desperate human need to create lasting joy for the people we'll have to leave behind. Steve's professional composure cracked visibly. His entertainer's mask gave way to something much more human as he processed the devastating honesty of Margaret's response. Here was a woman facing the end of her life who was spending her remaining energy trying to ensure that the people she loved would still experience magic after she was gone. "Margaret," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't trying to hide, "can you tell me more about what that feels like?" Margaret's response came with the straightforward courage of someone who had moved beyond the luxury of denial. "Every tradition I've created, every Christmas morning surprise, every cookie recipe, every way we've celebrated together, it all came from me," Margaret explained with heartbreaking clarity. "And when I'm gone, who will remember to put the star on top of the tree the way Emma likes? Who will know that Michael prefers his hot chocolate with extra marshmallows? Who will make sure Sophie gets to open the first present? These children won't have Christmas memories without someone who cares enough to create them." Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation and every rule of television production. "Stop the music," Steve called out, his voice carrying an authority that immediately silenced everyone in the studio. "Stop everything right now." The Family Feud theme music cut out abruptly. The cameras continued recording, but every crew member understood that they were no longer producing entertainment. Steve walked away from his podium toward Margaret, his movement deliberate and reverent, like someone approaching a moment of profound human truth. The studio audience watched in complete silence as Steve approached this 72-year-old woman who had just shared something devastatingly honest about love, legacy, and the lengths to which grandmothers will go to protect childhood magic. Steve stopped in front of Margaret, and for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other. One who had spent his career creating joy for others, another who had spent her life nurturing young hearts, both understanding that some moments transcend entertainment. "Margaret," Steve said gently, "I want you to listen to me. You're worried about who will create Christmas magic after you're gone. But Margaret, you're not creating magic. You are the magic, and that magic doesn't live in the cookies or the traditions or the presents. It lives in the love you've poured into those children's hearts." He continued, his voice carrying conviction that seemed to reach something deep inside Margaret's worry. "Those grandchildren of yours, they're going to carry your Christmas spirit inside them for the rest of their lives. When Emma grows up and has her own children, she's going to put that star on the tree exactly the way you taught her, because you showed her that love is in the details. When Michael makes hot chocolate for his own family, he's going to remember his grandmother who knew exactly how he liked it. When Sophie becomes a mother, she's going to let her child open the first present because that's what love looks like." Steve reached for Margaret's hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You're not leaving them without Christmas magic, Margaret. You're leaving them with the ability to create magic themselves, because that's what you've been teaching them all along." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since her diagnosis, her carefully maintained composure began to crumble. "But what if they forget?" she whispered. "What if the traditions die with me?" "They won't forget," Patricia called out from the family podium, her own voice thick with emotion. "Mom, we won't forget. We'll make sure every Christmas honors you. We'll tell them every story, keep every tradition, bake every cookie recipe. Your magic will live on through all of us." Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of our shows, had made millions of people laugh, had built a career on bringing joy to others through entertainment. But standing with Margaret O'Brien, he found himself confronting the reality that the most powerful magic isn't performed on television stages, but in the quiet moments when love creates lasting memories. "Margaret," Steve said, beginning to remove his suit jacket, "I want you to have something. This jacket has been with me through every Family Feud I've ever hosted. It's been part of creating joy for thousands of families. But today it's going home with someone who understands that the greatest gift we can give people is the ability to create their own magic." As Steve wrapped the expensive garment around Margaret's thin shoulders, the symbolism was clear to everyone present. This wasn't just a gesture of respect. It was a recognition that some legacies are built not through grand gestures, but through the patient daily work of nurturing love in others. "This jacket belongs to someone who spent 45 years teaching children they were capable of magic," Steve said, his voice carrying across the silent studio. Someone who understood that Christmas isn't about perfect traditions, but about perfect love. Someone who raised a family that will carry her magic forward long after she's gone. Margaret pulled the jacket around herself, and the notebook she'd been clutching seemed less like a desperate attempt to control the future and more like a love letter to the people who would carry her memory forward. Margaret, Steve continued, I want you to understand something. This Christmas doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be full of love. And from what I can see, that's something your family has in abundance. Steve turned to address the entire studio audience, his voice carrying conviction that made everyone present understand they were witnessing something important. This woman taught us something today, Steve announced. She taught us that love isn't about being there for every moment. Love is about raising people who can create magic themselves. She taught us that the greatest gift we can give our families isn't our presents, but our legacy of love. The applause that followed was unlike any sound the Family Feud studio had ever heard. It wasn't typical game show celebration, but something deeper, something that acknowledged the profound courage it had taken for Margaret to share her truth and the grace with which she was approaching an impossible situation. As the celebration continued around her, Margaret stood in the center of it all, wearing Steve's jacket like a badge of honor, her family nearby with tears of pride and love. For the first time since her diagnosis, Margaret wasn't thinking about all the Christmases she would miss. She was simply present in a moment of recognition that her lifetime of love had created something that would outlive her. 5 months later, Margaret O'Brien passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in March, surrounded by her family and wearing the jacket Steve had given her. But her prediction about her last Christmas had been wrong. She lived to see 2 more Christmases, each one filled with the magic she had spent her lifetime teaching others to create. The notebook that had seemed so urgent in the Family Feud studio became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations as a reminder that love speaks loudest through the details we remember to preserve. Emma did learn to place the star on the tree with the same reverence her grandmother had shown. Michael did make perfect hot chocolate for his own children. Sophie did understand that the first gift belongs to the youngest child. But the most important gift Margaret left wasn't written in any notebook. It was the understanding that Christmas magic isn't about perfect traditions or flawless celebrations. It's about the love that creates those traditions and the courage to trust that love will continue creating magic long after we're gone. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten, because sometimes a 72-year-old can teach an entire television studio that the greatest magic we can create is teaching others to find wonder in the world, one Christmas memory at a time.